Thank you, Brendan, for taking the time and coming on the podcast today. Really appreciate you taking the time. You are the founder and CEO of Mercor, and you and your co-founders recently made it to the Thiel Fellowship, which, congrats on that, and congrats on starting the company and
Thank
raising
you.
your first round of money and everything like that. Seems
Yeah.
like a super exciting time in life. But I'm interested in what you guys are doing with the company. It's basically focused on global talent and evaluating using AI, matching people to, elite companies around the world, everything like that. So excited to dig in. But before we get into anything, for those who don't know you, it would be great to just kind of tell your origin story from as early as you're willing to start to, where you are today and talk about some of the decisions you made along the way.
Of course. Yeah, I was born as an entrepreneur. Always loved building things when I was young, building all these sorts of little businesses, even starting in elementary school. I had a donut stand in eighth grade where I hired all of my friends and then would buy Safeway donuts every morning and then sell them outside my middle school at a 4x markup, and made thousands of dollars in eighth grade and knew that this was kind of the stuff that I had a lot of fun doing. And then in high school, I scaled a business to a six-figure run rate, doing AWS consulting and helping people to find AWS cloud promotions that they hadn't otherwise seen before. And that's also where I met my co-founders, Adarsh and Surya, where we all went to high school together. They were the winningest debate team of all time, but I'm dyslexic, so I was never that good at debate. I was in the shadows behind them, and I was roommates in college with Surya. And so when I was sort of thinking about who the best people in the world to found a company with, they were the ones. And so we started the business in called January of 2023, and then it's been a wild ride in dropping out and getting the fellowship and lots of funding and traction since then.
Nice. So what was the AWS business like? It sounds like the first business with the donuts, really good margins, but more
Yeah.
self-explanatory. The AWS sounds a little more confusing.
Yeah. This was a very fascinating business. I found out that a lot of startups were eligible for AWS cloud promotions to get through this program, AWS Activate, where they could get $5,000 in credits, but they weren't applying for this. So I would go to startups and I would, offer to give them consulting to help get them AWS credits, and then say I'd charge them $1,000 in exchange for getting them $5,000 in credits.
Hmm.
And a shocking number of startups hadn't done this. They viewed it as a no-brainer because they were paying $1,000 to save $5,000. And I was just like raking in cash because it was super simple to help them, and was a good cash flow business, but obviously very different in nature from what we're building today.
Well, no, it sounds like a great arbitrage. And so how exactly did you meet your founders as part of that? You mentioned one of them went to your high school.
Yeah, both of them did
Oh,
actually.
both
So
of them.
we went to high school in San Jose, all Bay Area raised, and met our freshman year. So I guess we met when I was 14, and then they had actually previously met doing debate stuff, even younger in fifth grade. So we've known each other for a really, really long time. And then I also worked with Adarsh on the AWS consulting business, where he helped with automation, operations, certain internal tools. And I built a lot of different AWS GUIs for fun in high school as well. And then we were working together remotely in college until up until dropping out.
Nice. And so two of you, I reversed it. So all three of you went to high school together, but only two of you went to college together. One went elsewhere, but you all decided to start this business together and dropped out around the same time.
Exactly. So Surya and I were roommates at Georgetown, and then Adarsh was at Harvard, and we all dropped out after our sophomore year to build the business. And so we went full time, called in June of 2023, and then just got the fellowship this month.
Very nice. So how was your college experience, while you were there, and what went into that decision for you personally, or, if you want to speak on behalf of all three of you, if it was very common decision-making process, but more so for you personally, you probably speak to better. Like, was that an easy decision? Was that painstaking and difficult to think about? How'd you go about that?
Good question. It was very different for all of us. I never wanted to go to college in the first place, and I initially refused to apply to schools, which had my parents, tearing their hair out. And then when I dropped out, I did so without telling them, and that really got them. And so Adarsh and Surya I think have a little bit of a different upbringing, maybe slightly less rebellious, and they technically didn't notify that they were on leave until August, whereas I just stopped doing school partway through my sophomore year.
Right. Is everything cool with your parents now? You figured
Oh
out with the
yeah,
company?
yeah. They were supportive the whole time, you know.
Yeah, yeah, classic. Well, cheers to you for, taking the leap like that. And
Yep.
especially it's difficult, we're laughing about it, but it's tough when your parents are like not on board to make a move like that. And especially when it's, dropping out, it's more popular and commonplace today than it was a decade ago, but it's still really unpopular. And most people, don't really have like any friends who have dropped out or you
Yeah.
look around you in your classes and everyone else is gonna plan to graduate. So it's a different move. Did you know
Yeah.
at that time that the Thiel Fellowship was going to be something that you were going to go for, or had was that part of the decision at all, or not really?
Not really, actually. I just knew that I couldn't sit still in classes, and I felt like I had to build a company. Even like I tried to do an internship, and I could not get out of like the CEO mindset and trying to like completely go outside of the bounds of my job to take a lot of initiative and do the things that I thought needed to happen. Um, so I dropped out regardless. But another thing on what you were mentioning earlier that's worth noting is that it's very cultural. And I actually think it's even more difficult in many other cultures. For example, Adarsh and Surya are Indian. And like Surya was joking with me that his parents told his grandparents that he got a scholarship. And they were excited about the Thiel Fellowship because it was a scholarship of $100,000. And they would never tell their extended family in India that he's dropping out. And so, it's difficult for me with my background, but at the end of the day, I grew up in Menlo Park. My parents sort of get it to some extent. I can only imagine how difficult it is for so many other people to take that jump.
Right. So how did you guys decide that this was the thing to work on before dropping out? It sounds like you had already started working on it. How did this idea emerge amongst, I'm sure a flood of other ideas that you've had over the years
Yeah.
for startups?
Yeah, we initially had the seeds of the idea after our senior year graduation trip from high school, where I was building a lot of AWS graphic user interfaces for clients of my consulting business and trying to find, developers that could help me do that more quickly, more efficiently. And they were talking with me about how incredible it was to work with like Indian talent and the people at the IITs being such exceptional engineers that people really weren't giving opportunity to. And so we talked about that, I guess, when we were 18, and we're talking about it for a long period of time. We launched a dev shop where we were working with devs in India to help build projects for friends and family, and that was going pretty well. And then a lot of our friends just asked to start using sort of the talent features that or the recruiting processes that we built for our dev shop to help hire talent directly from us rather than through the dev shop. And it grew out of that. I think that we've all always had a really strong fascination with labor markets, labor inefficiency, and that being the largest opportunity on earth.
Yeah, so let's double click on that a little bit because I think I kind of know what you mean, but labor markets, labor inefficiency, these are not like exciting words to a lot of people. They seem like they kind of sound big and generic and maybe like a bit boring or something, but you're
Yeah.
fascinated with these things. Your co-founders, you're fascinated with these things. Why is that exactly? Like what are these things and why are you fascinated with them?
Well, labor powers the global economy, right? And just like there's a bunch of work that needs to be done, and then there's a bunch of people to do that work. And we have a process of, companies forming around the opportunities with, economic monetary incentives, and then paying people to do those jobs. And the current way that works is extremely inefficient, where they might hire someone for as like a full-time employee who might be, pulled in 100 different directions doing things that they're not a world-class expert at.
Yeah.
And the reason the market is so inefficient is this matching problem of having all these jobs, all these people that have abilities, but understanding who should be doing what in each specific use case. And we saw ChatGPT and got really excited because it offers, and like the broader improvement of LLMs offer an opportunity to solve that matching problem through collecting and evaluating the requisite data on human ability via AI interviews that talk to people, understand what they're good at, what they're bad at, and then are also able to search over that to, see the entirety of someone's GitHub, to see everything that they talked about in their interview and the nuances of their resume and find the perfect person for a specific job. So a way of thinking about our platform is it's this aggregator marketplace where we collect all of the requisite data on human ability and then use that to evaluate people and match them with companies that are looking for people to do jobs.
Yeah, that's a really good fundamental explanation that I think for people who might find labor markets uninteresting, that might make it a bit more interesting sounding and certainly important. When you guys sought out to build what you did, well, maybe you can just first introduce, you kind of introduced it there, but you can introduce exactly what Mercor is today, and then maybe we'll get into what it could be in the future.
Yeah, Mercor is a AI-powered way of assessing talent for companies, where we have an AI interviewer that will join a Zoom room like this one and talk to people, asking super detailed questions about the nuances of their work history or their education, and then evaluate them based on everything on their resume, everything that they said during their interview, and their holistic profile as a person to determine who should be doing what jobs.
So what are the most important inputs? You have this AI interview, you have their resume, which, presumably includes like their education, their previous work experiences, all the
Yeah.
stuff that's classically on a resume. Have you thought of serving, certain testing around whether it's like a coding test or, SAT scores and stuff? Maybe you're pulling that from the resume, IQ tests, things like this,
The
personality
answer is
tests even.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The answer is that it's very role dependent. A basic framework for thinking about company needs is that there's two dimensions. The first dimension is excellence, like how generally exceptional is that person, and the second dimension is relevance. And it's very contextual to the role, which one matters. For example, if we're hiring like a generalist data scientist for our evaluation team, we tend to just be looking for someone who's like brilliant, and likely crushed all the standardized tests, but then also has some degree of background in data science, though the brilliance and initiative and being entrepreneurial is much more important. Versus if you're hiring someone to build React components for your web app, then that person just having spent a lot of time becoming an expert in React is much more important. So I find that framework very helpful to think about job requirements.
Right. So you're using the AI on the candidate side in terms of evaluation and things like this, but are you also using AI on the sort of job description side for these various roles to determine, hey, here's this data science role. We want to really place a very heavy weight on general brilliance and, maybe like standardized test scores, but not as much on relevant experience versus this React like a specific coder where you're like, oh, I just want, expertise in history in this language.
Exactly, yeah. So now we work with a lot of the largest AI labs in Silicon Valley. And one of the key things that we do is we take all of the data on who performs well at those companies for what reasons. And then we're able to build a model that can predict who will perform well based on that. In certain roles, it's those things you're talking about, like test scores, like general brilliance, having, built bombs as kids or whatever the obscure predictor is. In other scenarios, it's, more just domain expertise. And it's really, really dependent. I find that people try to homogenize this stuff a lot, but there's just so many jobs to be done in the economy that fortunately require so many different people, and finding the right person for each thing is really impactful.
Yeah. So how do you, yeah, just to comment on a high level, it's really interesting because basically I think what you're talking about is increasing the realization of human potential or organizational potential in the world by improving the match, basically,
Yeah,
where you have people are more aligned in their jobs with their strengths and their specific areas of excellence than they currently are. And so you can have the same global talent pool and the same global set of jobs or companies or whatever it might be. And just by improving the matching, you're actually sort of improving the effectiveness of all of these organizations and all of these people around the world.
That's absolutely correct. But the other thing I would mention is that it's also very impactful on the candidate side, right? Where people doing work that they love is one of the largest predictors to people enjoying their lives, right? If the thing that they do all day is actually, positive, enjoyable within their domain of expertise, something that they're growing in. So we think a lot about not just who's going to be most performant in the company, but how can we be really applicant first and doing everything that we can to help applicants improve their profile, have a better experience, and find a job that they find really fulfilling.
Is there like a strength quantifier, like a match strength quantifier in a sense where like in simple terms, I guess you go to like Netflix or something and it's like, there's like a 97% chance based on your watching history that you're going to enjoy this movie or like 83% chance you're going to enjoy this movie. Is there like a quantitative percentage or something for these candidates that's like, based like you have a ton of history and it's very clear here, very clear cut based on our AI evaluation that like this is 97% like something that you're really going to enjoy doing and be great at versus someone who maybe just like they're 22 years old, they don't have that much work history, they don't have that many hard skills, and it's like, look, like we've done the evaluation here, but we're only like kind of 72% on like this match for you, and we just kind of need more data points over more time to be able to give you a higher conviction prediction.
No, exactly. So the model outputs a degree of confidence. So for example, for a company, we analyzed 100,000 profiles of software engineers that they had internally at their company to see, so, one of the largest companies in the world, to see who got promoted and who didn't, for what reasons. And we were able to predict with, I believe it was a 71% degree of confidence who would get promoted in the first 18 months on the job. And so those kinds of indicators can be really strong. And the way it works is that we sort of have this input data of resume, interview, maybe online profile like a GitHub. And then we have this second layer where we'll use LLMs to engineer off certain features. An example of a feature might be certain characteristics in the tone of someone as they're speaking in an interview, or even there's like super cool new features that are becoming possible with newer models. Like MIT released research that you can detect someone's heart rate based on the video footage of that individual, all the way to more obvious things like just how impressive their previous work experience is. And then we map all of those features onto the performance data to see how well we can predict and build a model to estimate, some best fit with that performance data.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So basically, when you talk about like the 71% confidence in someone being promoted in their first X months, that was as it pertained to like new candidates who you're screening through
Exactly.
Mercor, prospective candidates to this particular AI company. But the way that you're deriving that statistic and that confidence level, in addition to the evaluation on the new candidate, is by ingesting all of this data from the existing workforce at that company. Is that right?
Exactly. So we've done that in the past, though our main business is in building our own prediction models off of our own data rather than building stuff custom for enterprises, though we've done that as well. But like an example is we create a lot of synthetic data sets on output where we'll give people projects that we hire them for, and then we'll try to predict, who's likely to do well on that project for what reasons, and really building up this data set that's internal to Mercor that can allow us to be super predictive in our own models on human ability.
Like what kind of projects?
It might be a full stack project to build a web app with LLMs that does one thing or another, if that's what we're trying to do. One interesting thing to note for any of your listeners that are hiring is the largest takeaway that I have from spending a lot of time around hiring and thinking really critically about it is that the largest mistake companies make is trying to use a proxy for an act for how well someone will do at a task rather than the actual task itself.
Hmm.
For example, many companies will try to give someone a leak code problem or data structures and algorithms. and say that this is generally a predictor if that person is smart. And they're correct that it is, but you're probably actually far better off having them do, a 1 week project that most closely mirrors the kind of work that they would be doing on the job. And it's probably worth the resources to facilitate that project just because it's so much more predictive of employee performance.
Right. So I think we touched on it earlier a little bit, but concretely, are you guys considering or already using any sorts of tests that you're serving? Like you're taking their SAT scores and stuff like this from prior testing that they've done independently, but are you serving any tests? You're doing projects, but are you serving any sort of like IQ tests or intelligence tests or personality behavior type tests or anything like that?
I wouldn't characterize them as intelligence tests, but we do administer our own tests in the form of AI interviews. We have two kinds of AI interviews. The first is a holistic AI interview that will spend the first half finding what's most impressive about someone on their resume and then asking really thorough follow-up questions to try to understand that part of them.
Mm,
So, a couple of years ago about me, it might have spent 10 minutes grilling me on my AWS consulting business in high
hmm.
school, trying to understand how impressive is that, what are the character traits we can extract from that, et cetera. And the second half of this holistic interview is asking them more technical questions about the skills that they express on the resume. So maybe if it's a business analyst, it might be asking them more technical things about Excel or accounting or whatever skill sets are most pertinent to the role. If it's a software engineer, like a front end engineer, it might ask them more technical questions about React. The second kind of assessment that we administer is a AI proctored data structures and algorithms interview, or just coding interview in general, where we give them a compiler that AI will talk through the response to them to make sure that they're not cheating and sort of emulate a human process.
So how does this AI interview, maybe we'll stick to the first one for now, the more generic interview. How does that compare to a human interview, just kind of like anecdotally for the listener to try to understand what that interview looks like or how it feels?
The most fascinating thing is that humans don't do much pre-processing before an interview. Humans tend to glance at a resume or a LinkedIn for a minute or two, and then
Yeah.
they'll come to an interview. Whereas the models can do a huge amount of pre-processing and understanding all the nuances of someone's background, the system architecture of their GitHub repositories, all the way to the details of their work experience. So it'll do pre-processing to prepare for the interview, and it'll ask very specific questions about someone's background that's diving into all of the details that it can find about that individual. And I'm happy to also send you a demo because it's very cool and goes viral all the time. And it'll just be like a Zoom call with a human where the AI's camera is turned off, I guess is the metaphor, and ask a really thorough, compelling interview.
Yeah, it sounds super interesting. I definitely love to see the demo, and I'm a little bit sitting here wondering if I'm gonna keep being podcasting in a couple of years or if there's just gonna be all AI interviewers out there that are doing a much better job than me.
It's
But
a
yeah, it's
fascinating question. I will say one thing to note on that is I think that there's always going to be these arenas for sort of wanting to hear human experiences and see human experiences, and the analogy of how chess became even more popular after, computers got way better than humans at chess, I think is
right.
probably comparative to your security in your role as a podcaster.
Yeah, no, I don't know if you're just saying that to make me feel better or not, but I appreciate it, and hopefully, I do think that there is a human element that becomes more important, regardless of whether the AI is like sort of objectively better. The human side of things will sort of could become kind of like a premium element in the future if and when AI is handling all of the sort of objective needs. So, where was I going to go? Going back to the original problem as you sort of scoped it out at like this massive mismatch in the market for human labor. Do you like one thing that you mentioned was you have these jobs where people are kind of sitting in a role with a bunch of different responsibilities and their skill sets are best suited towards, maybe one or two or a few different things that they actually do best. Do you think that this is probably sort of beyond the scope of what you guys are doing immediately, or maybe not, but do you see a world in the future where jobs are more specific and more task-based and less full-time, sit in this position and do this wide variety of things, and be on the clock all the time and like working for this one company versus maybe the best way to get the maximum sort of like output from a particular individual, and to your point, like maximize their happiness in a sense of being able to work on something that they're really good at and really enjoy, and also just get the most out of that person's work abilities by having them do one very specific thing for 3 or 4 companies rather than, 5 or 6 different responsibilities for one company in a traditional full-time role.
Yeah, this is something we think about a lot. And I think people have been talking about this for called the past 5, 10 years in the context of what is the future of work and how does that frame investment theses. And frankly, up until a couple of years ago, I didn't really believe that work was trending to be more task-based. And then it wasn't until I saw how models are developing and what kinds of things they need to improve at tasks and their abilities in performing in tasks that I came to the conclusion that work will almost certainly transition towards becoming much, much more task-based, particularly over the next 5 years. The reason for this is that many people don't know sort of about the underground industry of AI tutors, where companies that are building the next generation of foundation models are hiring many domain experts to do specific tasks as inputs to create data for models, now pouring hundreds of millions of dollars, or each of them are pouring hundreds of millions in. So in aggregate, many billions of dollars into solving this problem. And what it seems like the market is trending towards is that AI will complete all knowledge work. And then whatever knowledge work it's unable to create, humans will create training data and examples of doing that knowledge work so that AI can eventually do it. And I believe that this ability of the models and requisite to train them is going to push work to become much, much more task-based.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. So for your business, obviously, it's sort of dependent, at least it seems in its current state, to be somewhat dependent on a future of human knowledge workers. Is that like, how do you reconcile this concept that almost all knowledge work gradually will be better done by AIs, which will be trained by the best in class humans doing that work currently, versus your current sort of model of being a focus on placing humans?
The key question is around elasticity of demand in the economy. Right now, imagine if we're just throwing numbers to it that AI can do 5% of tasks and humans can do 95% of tasks. I think that's going to trend more and more towards AI in the future. However, even in a world where AI is doing 95% of tasks, I actually still think humans are going to play a huge role in the economy. In fact, it's even more economically valuable to figure out which humans should be doing that 5% in a world where they have 20x leverage on the economic output from performing that task. And so it's sort of this like question people talk about a lot of, if you make the average software engineer 100x more productive, what's going to happen to software engineers? And the answer is that it's completely framed by the elasticity of demand for what they're doing. And I think that in many cases, we'll just make 100 or 1,000 times more software that might not look like 100 or 1,000 times more unique web apps, but it might be better ranking algorithms, better automation of processes, all of these little things behind the scenes that can and will happen in the knowledge work economy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So where are you guys at today in like the scheme of your ultimate vision? Not expecting you to necessarily have like a 10 plus year plan or anything, but you've got like an initial roadmap, I presume, that you're sort of like executing upon. Where are
Yeah.
you guys at today, and why was this sort of like the initial um path that you wanted to go down, the initial stages that you wanted to sort of get through? And if you can give like sort of a teaser as to what you're thinking about in terms of what's next.
Yeah, so we started with a talent pool predominantly in India. The reason being a little bit of domain expertise there, but most importantly, that India had a large talent density problem where the average engineer is not exceptional, But if you're able to automate the process of evaluating candidates, you can find the diamonds in the rough, if you will. Now we're starting to expand to become much more global, onboarding people from everywhere in the world, from Argentina to Ukraine, all the way to the United States, and getting many exceptional candidates. So we're still focused on software engineers, but we've launched all sorts of tools to ramp that up significantly. We've onboarded over 300,000 people to our talent pool so far and are growing that really exponentially. I think the long-term plan is that we want to have 100 million people on the platform by the end of next year. And so we're building a lot of infrastructure to enable that, to process candidates and everyone properly, to eventually help facilitate the entire knowledge work economy.
So 100 million people, obviously like massive number.
Yeah.
How do you get from 300,000 to 100 million?
It's fascinating. There's this marketplace dynamic where it's much harder to scale, or it's very difficult to scale one side of a marketplace faster than another. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how to get around this. And the answer is by creating intrinsic value on the applicant side. So we're launching new lines of AI tools that give people free feedback on their resumes, free feedback on their interviews. And those tools are seeing a ton of product market fit and traction in our early beta. So we'll unleash that to the public freely. These tools have lots of product market fit in a paid context, let alone a free context. And that's sort of the main path to really scaling up applicant capacity.
Yeah, those tools sound like extremely valuable. I would love to try them myself. How about the other side of the marketplace for the actual jobs?
We've seen a ridiculous amount of uptick, particularly in the last 2 months, where we've sort of engaged in, a half dozen enterprise deals, placed thousands of people with jobs. And so that's scaling, but it has to scale in a more constrained way because of just the dynamics of our business, particularly with enterprise. And then we also have a significant self-serve business where there's lots of people that just come to the platform, you're able to use the self-serve, and that is growing more organically, and we're really excited about.
Right. So that side of the marketplace is going to grow maybe a bit more linearly. And just because of sort of like, it sounds like the services involved, the self-serve may be usable for some people, but there's some level of service required on the enterprise level, whereas the other side of the marketplace through these free and useful products can be, completely exponential. You can get millions and millions of people, with no restraint.
It's framed by K factors affecting consumer, but not B2B, right? In that we just need to build a product where the average person refers at least one person to it on the applicant side for us to really, unlock unlimited growth. Versus on the business side, it's like very difficult to have a like short time frame with a K factor. So we can still get like lots of referrals from existing clients, but it can't scale nearly at the same velocity that we can scale the top of funnel applicants.
Makes sense. Yeah, so it's super exciting business. I can't wait to see where it is, a year from now, let alone 6 months or 5 years from now. But lastly, I know we're coming up on time, but would be curious to hear about your experience, with the Thiel Fellowship. Again, congrats to you and your co-founders. I think it's pretty rare. I mean, it's rare to get in the Thiel Fellowship regardless. Been fortunate to speak with a bunch of Thiel Fellows on the podcast, and almost, basically uniformly interesting people, at least the ones I've talked to who are part of the program, very ambitious and just extraordinary people. But very rare, not only to get into it, but to actually have multiple co-founders, let alone three, all get into it. It's like a class of 20 each year. So I guess, what do you think it was about you guys that sort of stood out, and what's your early experience been as being a part of the fellowship?
I think one thing that stood out is that it's rare to have all three co-founders be really exceptional. And I've been very fortunate that, I met Adarsh and Surya who are extremely awesome. And they really like jumped out as, being extraordinary people, I think, to the fellowship. And that was one of the big motivators. I think they were also just very impressed with the traction and progress of the business, which obviously sort of goes hand in hand with that.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Do you think there was anything about like, obviously you mentioned your co-founders were like on the debate team together.
Yeah.
Was there anything about your guys' shared experience in high school in particular that maybe other classmates of yours, like this high school, produced exceptional people for some particular reason? Or was it just sort of more so chance, or also, just being in, growing up in Menlo Park might on its own have sort of some of that impact of you're more likely to have more extraordinary people in like the startup entrepreneurial realm come out of a place like that.
I'm extremely bullish on Bay Area high schools. Like the caliber of high school students in the Bay Area is really exceptional. And I think that has a lot of positive reinforcement where when you're around other exceptional people, it helps to make you better and push you harder. And like one thing I've heard from almost all of my friends from high school is that they've gone to college and found that it's much less competitive and it's not nearly as difficult as, high school might have been. So I think that it's largely around just this geographic nature of all of the, incredible people who are in the Bay Area having incredible kids and all of those people pushing one another.
Yeah, and one interesting thing related to that is like what you guys are doing is very much a global thing. And so you're trying to, with this current, everything's now remote, it's different than a few years ago. Um, Especially for software engineering. And so the need for companies to require, people to be living in the Bay Area to recruit only from a relatively small pool of people in the Bay Area has sort of like evaporated overnight, and the entire world of talent has sort of opened up, and you're playing a large part in like sort of discovering that talent. Do you think that the advantages of growing up and being in a place like the Bay Area will persist for a long time to come, or do you think that that will sort of equal out and just sort of like the basically the level of talent will globalize in a sense, and that what you guys are doing with Mercor will be able to sort of accelerate that in a way?
I think the level of talent will globalize. The markets used to be much more simple when they were very localized, and now the markets are becoming globalized. I think that the nature of work being predominantly W-2 full-time work, as we were discussing earlier right now, is the case for people still hiring in person. But as models get better and start replacing knowledge work and things become more task-based, I think that's a huge accelerant on globalization. And it's really exciting to me in helping candidates and people looking for jobs because I know so many extraordinary people all over the world who otherwise wouldn't have had access to opportunity, but are able to come into high-paying jobs where they make more than they ever would have imagined and, really help organizations.
Very, very cool. So I know we're up on time, so we'll wrap it up there. But it's been awesome talking with you about your story and your business, and your vision for the future of labor markets. So I'm curious to follow along and see where all this goes. But where can people go to get involved, or what's the first step to get involved with Mercor and follow you and your co-founders and see where the journey goes?
Absolutely. They can check out mercor.com, mercor.com. We have two platforms. One's for applicants that are looking for a job, and another's for companies looking to hire. So we're happy to help out both sides and would love to show everyone all of the technology that we've been building.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, man, and congrats on everything. It's super exciting stuff, and can't wait to see where it all goes.
Absolutely. Great to chat.